I prepared a homily, but as I'm reading this, I'm thinking of a story that I need to share with you. Especially, I read through and I meditate on the gospel to prepare the homily. For you want to prepare our podcast, make sure you check out our podcast, Catholic Influencers podcast. But when I was just reading through this verse, that the first must be last and that we must be a servant of all. I work at a rehab. I every now and then go to help out on the streets of Melbourne, but also in a small town I go to a rehabilitation center where I hang out with addicts, ex-addicts, addicts, people who are going through rehabilitation. And it's struggles, it's full of ups and downs. But I remember being there, and just while for a few months there was this man, let's call him Joe. Joe was going through rehab. He was going through a time where he spent a whole life of addiction, a whole life where he struggled with abuse at home, and he ended up losing everything and ended up on the streets, and he ended up in rehab. We ended up talking, met him in a place, managed to get him into this rehab. But Joe had something. Joe was rough, he was tough, he was not a type of person you'd want to mess around with. But eventually he went to this Christian rehab. And this is where I go to speak and I go to help out. And Joe, during one of the prayer meetings, had this incredible encounter with Jesus. He encountered the love of God in a way that changed his life forever. In fact, week after week, when I would go and visit, I felt like he was a different person every week. Every week he was holier. Every week he was full of joy, more full of joy, and would spend hours talking, and he would talk to me about Jesus. And I'm thinking, my goodness, this man loves Jesus more than I do. And so he just fell in love with Jesus. But you see, the thing that impressed me was not that he fell in love with Jesus, but that it started to manifest in a way that was so evident. He began all of a sudden just wanting to give this love to others. He would serve people, wake up early and prepare the breakfast table. Every time there was a mess, he'd tidy it up. Every time someone was in trouble, he'd go and help them. Sometimes he'd frustrate people because he was just so generous and so kind and so giving. And he was just a person that was overflowing with this love of God and wanted to serve God through others. With these disciples, you see, sometimes they lost sight of this. They lost sight of what it meant to be a disciple of Jesus. To be a disciple of Jesus was not to find a place of comfort, of authority, to be on the right or on the left of Jesus, but it was about service. You see, when we encounter this love and this service that God has towards us, we cannot help but reach out to others. And so Joe continued to serve these people. And they continued to have prayer meetings. As I said, this was a Christian rehab. But one day, one of the leaders of this rehab came up to me and said, "Father Rob, we had a really strange experience last week." And what happened was there was a preacher, and the preacher came and he started to preach. And as he started to preach, many people started to feel convicted, and to the point where some of the inmates or people who were there in rehab went to the front and they knelt down on the floor and they started crying. And one of these people crying and giving their life to God and wanting more of God started to cry and say this, he started praying, "God, I want to be like Joe. I want to be like Joe." He was on his knees crying and saying, "I want to be like Joe." And the preacher looked at this guy and said, "Listen, you want to be like Jesus, not like Joe." And he sort of looked at this preacher and he said, "Well, tell me, is Jesus like Joe?" The only Jesus he knew, the person he wanted to be like was Joe, because Joe was the only person he saw that loved Jesus so authentically. Sometimes, you see, the only Jesus that the people want to be like, that the people desire, sometimes the only Jesus that people will see is you. And so the question I ask is, are you like Joe? When people desire Jesus, do they think of the characteristics that you manifest? Do people want to be like you because you reflect Jesus so much? You see, Joe struggles, still in and out of addiction, I'll be honest with you. But, you see, he struggles with the Lord. He struggles knowing that he wants to serve others, he wants to love others. And people see this love that he has, and this human struggle that he has with Jesus and for Jesus. The question I ask myself all the time is, do people see my love for Jesus? Do they want what I have because I reflect Jesus? Or am I seeking comfort? Am I seeking to be this disciple that wants to get to heaven at all costs, and everyone else and anything else doesn't matter? You see, a true disciple has a burden in their heart, and this burden is for souls. It's a burden to reach out to serve others. And Lord Jesus, this is what I want. I want to have this burden to serve you. And in this service, in this burden, in this reaching out to people, please, Jesus, let others not see me, but always see you, your Spirit working in me.